The silence stretched across the Hindu Kush like a living thing, heavy and unforgiving. At exactly 400 hours, Team Viper's radio chatter ceased mid-transmission. Their last words crackled through static. Movement in the valley, we're going dark for, then nothing. 8 Navy SEALs vanished into the mountain's embrace, leaving behind only the echo of their final breath through encrypted channels. Captain Leela Ghost Razvan stood in the operations center at Bagram Air Base, her weathered hands gripping the edge of the tactical display. The green dots representing Viper Team had been motionless for 47 minutes. Around her, junior officers whispered theories, their voices carrying that particular tension that comes when elite warriors simply disappear. But Ghost wasn't listening to their speculation. She was studying the topographical readout, her amber eyes tracing elevation lines like a hunter reading tracks. "Ma'am, Command wants to know if we should initiate search and rescue protocols," Lieutenant Martinez said, his voice betraying the uncertainty that comes with addressing someone whose reputation precedes them into every room. Ghost's call sign hadn't come from her pale complexion or her ability to slip through enemy airspace undetected, though she excelled at both. It came from the way she seemed to materialize at impossible moments, appearing when hope had been abandoned and vanishing before credit could be assigned. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and a classified mission in Syria that officially never happened. The brass tolerated her unconventional methods because her success rate spoke louder than their discomfort with her gender. She turned from the display, and Martinez noticed something in her expression that made him step back instinctively. It wasn't anger or fear, it was recognition, like a mathematician seeing the final piece of an equation snap into place. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Give me the weather reports for grid squares 7 through 12, and get me flight clearance for a solo reconnaissance run." "Ma'am, protocol suggests." "Protocol suggests a lot of things, Lieutenant, most of them written by people who have never been shot at." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd made impossible decisions in impossible places. 8 of our best are missing in territory that swallows helicopters whole. We're not sending more bodies into that mountain until we know what we're walking into. The operations center hummed with nervous energy as Ghost moved toward the door. She paused at the threshold, her gaze returning to the tactical display where those 8 green dots remained frozen in digital amber. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, her brothers were either fighting for their lives or already past the point where fighting mattered. Either way, she was going to bring them home. The war in Afghanistan had taken many things from many people, but it hadn't taken her ability to read the sky like scripture. And tonight, the sky was trying to tell her something. Ghost pushed through the briefing room doors into the pre-dawn darkness, where her A-10 Thunderbolt II waited on the tarmac like a sleeping predator. The aircraft's twin engines and distinctive straight wings gave it an ungainly appearance that had earned it the nickname Warthog among pilots. But Ghost knew what others often forgot. Ugly things could be beautiful when they saved lives. She ran her pre-flight check with the methodical precision of someone who understood that overlooking a single detail could mean the difference between coming home and becoming another name on the memorial wall. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon's 7 barrels gleamed dully in the hangar lights, ready to deliver 30mm rounds at a rate that could turn enemy positions into memory. But tonight, Ghost hoped the Warthog's sensors would be more valuable than its weapons. The flight line bustled with the organized chaos of a military airfield at war. Ground crews moved between aircraft like ghosts themselves, performing the ritual maintenance that kept America's air power operational. Ghost watched them work, remembering her own early days as an enlisted maintainer before flight school, before the commission, before she became the woman who flew into places others wouldn't even map. "Captain Razvan," a voice called across the tarmac. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached with the purposeful stride of someone bearing news. "Command's asking for your estimated time of departure. They want to coordinate with ISR assets in the area. Tell Command I launch in 20 minutes, Ghost replied, continuing her external inspection of the aircraft's control surfaces. And Rodriguez, make sure they understand this is a reconnaissance mission only. I'm not cleared for offensive operations unless our people are in immediate danger. Rodriguez nodded, but his expression suggested he'd seen enough of Ghost's missions to know that the line between reconnaissance and combat had a way of blurring when lives hung in the balance. She'd earned her reputation not just for her flying skills, but for her ability to make split-second decisions that somehow always erred on the side of bringing everyone home. The mountains ahead held their secrets like clenched fists, and somewhere in that darkness, 8 warriors waited for salvation that might never come. Ghost climbed into her cockpit, knowing that she was their best hope for seeing another dawn. The engine spooled up with a whine that cut through the Afghan night, and the hunt began. As Ghost taxied toward the runway, her radio crackled with clearance from the tower. Overlord 7-7, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds light and variable, ceiling unlimited. Fly safe out there, Ghost. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar sensation of controlled violence as 22,000 pounds of aircraft and ordnance accelerated down the runway. The A-10 lifted off smoothly, its wings biting into the thin mountain air with the confidence of a machine designed for exactly this purpose. Behind her, Bagram grew smaller, its perimeter lights forming geometric patterns against the desert floor. Ghost banked north toward the Hindu Kush, where the mountains rose like the backbone of an ancient god. Her aircraft's targeting pod painted the landscape in infrared shades of gray and white, revealing heat signatures that might be rocks, might be equipment, might be the men she'd come to find. The terrain below was a maze of valleys and ridgelines that had swallowed armies for centuries, from Alexander's Macedonians to Soviet mechanized divisions. Overlord 7-7 to Bagram Control, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. I'm approaching the last known position of Viper Team, beginning systematic sweep of grid squares 7 through 12. The response came immediately. Copy 7-7. Be advised we've had sporadic radio interference in that area over the past 6 hours. Could be atmospheric, could be jamming. Recommend extreme caution. Ghost smiled grimly. Caution was a luxury she'd abandoned somewhere over Fallujah in 2008, when she'd flown her damaged Warthog through a sandstorm to provide close air support for a surrounded Marine platoon. Tonight, caution meant 8 good men might die waiting for someone brave enough to find them. She descended to 8,000 feet, low enough to distinguish human heat signatures from the false positives that plagued high-altitude reconnaissance. The mountains rose around her like cathedral spires, their peaks crowned with snow that gleamed silver in the starlight. Below, countless caves and crevices offered hiding places for both friend and foe. Her thermal imaging system swept across the terrain in methodical patterns, searching for any sign of the missing team. Ghost had memorized their planned route, their fallback positions, and their emergency rally points. But she also knew that plans rarely survived contact with the enemy, and 8 men could disappear into this landscape as easily as smoke into wind. The first hint of dawn touched the eastern peaks as Ghost completed her initial sweep of the primary search area. Her fuel gauge showed she had perhaps 2 hours of flight time remaining, enough for a thorough search of the secondary zones, but not enough for the luxury of multiple passes. She was about to radio her negative findings when something caught her attention in the thermal display. Heat signature, human-sized, moving. But as she banked toward the contact, Ghost realized something that made her blood run cold. The signature was alone, separated from any group and moving in a pattern that suggested injury or distress. One man, stumbling through a narrow ravine 2 clicks south of Viper Team's last known position. Where were the other 7? She descended further, pushing the A-10 to the edge of its low-altitude capabilities. The lone figure below had stopped moving, as if aware of the aircraft's presence. Ghost switched to her optical camera, zooming in until individual details became visible. The man wore desert camouflage, carried what appeared to be an M4 carbine, and was looking directly up at her aircraft. Then he did something that changed everything. The figure raised his weapon and fired a single flare into the pre-dawn sky. But this wasn't a standard rescue flare or a signal for extraction. As the bright red light arced overhead, it formed a pattern Ghost recognized from her earliest days in the military, a symbol that shouldn't exist anymore, that belonged to a classified program that had been terminated years ago. Her hands tightened on the flight controls as memories flooded back. Operation Nightshade, the program that had trained her, shaped her, and ultimately broken her in ways that took years to heal. The symbol floating above the Afghan mountains was the call sign of someone who should have been dead, someone whose existence had been officially denied for the better part of a decade. Ghost keyed her radio with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. Bagram Control, this is Overlord 77. I have visual contact with a possible survivor, but we have a problem. She paused, watching the flare fade against the lightning sky. I need to speak with Colonel Harrison immediately, and I need him to pull the Nightshade files. The response took longer than usual. 77, say again your last transmission. Did you say Nightshade? Affirmative. And Control, clear all radio traffic on this frequency. We're now operating under Protocol 7. Protocol 7 meant the mission had moved beyond standard parameters into territory that required clearance from levels of command that most officers would never see. It meant that whatever was happening in these mountains had roots that stretched back into the classified shadows of America's hidden wars. Ghost circled overhead, watching the lone figure below as he moved deeper into the ravine. She'd found one man, but 7 others remained missing, and now she had to consider the possibility that their disappearance was connected to something far more complex than a routine patrol gone wrong. The Nightshade symbol changed everything, opening doors to questions she'd hoped never to face again. As she adjusted her flight pattern to maintain visual contact with the survivor, Ghost began to understand that this mission would demand more than her skills as a pilot. It would require her to confront a past that officially didn't exist and make decisions that would echo far beyond these mountains. The sun climbed higher, painting the peaks in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere below, 8 men needed rescue. But first, Ghost had to figure out whether she was saving them from the enemy or delivering them into the hands of something far worse. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission, but the voice that came through wasn't from Bagram Control. It was older, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that moved pieces on boards most people couldn't see. Ghost, this is Overwatch. We've been monitoring your transmission. Maintain your current position and prepare for encrypted tasking. The situation has been elevated beyond normal channels. She recognized the voice, though she hadn't heard it in 5 years. Colonel Marcus Harrison, the man who'd recruited her into Nightshade, trained her for missions that existed only in the memories of those who'd survived them, and ultimately signed the orders that had supposedly closed the program forever. Copy Overwatch, standing by for tasking. Ghost's voice remained professional, but her mind raced through implications. If Harrison was personally involved, it meant the missing SEALs had stumbled into something that connected to operations she'd thought were buried forever. The lone figure below had reached what appeared to be a cave entrance carved into the ravine wall. He turned once more toward her aircraft, and Ghost saw him perform a series of hand signals that confirmed her worst fears. He was Nightshade trained, using communication protocols that had been classified above top secret. Ghost realized she was no longer on a simple search and rescue mission. She was being drawn back into a world she'd escaped, where the difference between ally and enemy depended on knowledge that could get you killed just for possessing it. The 8 missing SEALs weren't just lost, They were pawns in a game whose rules she'd helped write but never fully understood. The mountains below held more than missing soldiers. They held secrets that powerful people had killed to protect, and now those secrets were demanding payment in blood once again. As she maintained her orbit above the ravine, Ghost understood that bringing her brothers home would require her to become someone she tried very hard to forget. The woman who could make impossible decisions without hesitation. The pilot who could fly through hell and emerge with everyone who went in with her. The operative who understood that sometimes saving lives meant taking them. The figure below disappeared into the cave, but not before leaving behind a marker that only she would recognize. 3 stones arranged in a specific pattern, visible from above, pointing toward a secondary location deeper in the mountains. It was a breadcrumb trail designed for someone with her training, her clearances, and her particular set of skills. Ghost banked her aircraft toward the indicated coordinates, knowing she was following a path that had been prepared specifically for her. The question that gnawed at her wasn't whether she could complete the mission. It was whether the mission she thought she was flying was the same one someone else had planned for her. The Hindu Kush stretched endlessly ahead, its valleys holding shadows that seemed to move with purpose. Ghost flew toward them anyway, because 8 men were counting on her, and because some promises transcend the fear of what keeping them might cost. Her fuel gauge showed 90 minutes remaining, enough time to find answers, but perhaps not enough to escape the consequences of learning them. Ghost pushed the throttles forward anyway, chasing ghosts through mountains that had been collecting them for centuries. The encrypted radio channel activated with a burst of static, followed by Harrison's voice delivering coordinates and code words that transported her back to missions she'd thought were finished forever. As she flew toward the designated location, Ghost began to understand that some wars never end. They just wait in the shadows for the right moment to reclaim their soldiers. Ghost arrived at the coordinates to find a landscape that looked like the surface of an alien world. Wind-carved rocks formed natural amphitheaters between towering cliffs, and in the center of one such formation, she spotted what she'd been directed to find. An improvised landing zone marked with precisely placed reflective panels, visible only from directly overhead. Someone had prepared this site recently, within the last few hours. She circled twice, scanning for threats before committing to the approach. Landing an A-10 in such terrain violated every safety protocol in the manual, but Ghost had built her reputation on making the impossible look routine. The Warthog touched down on a strip of hardpan barely long enough to accommodate its landing gear, rocks scraping against the aircraft's armored belly as it rolled to a stop. Engine shutdown brought an immediate and oppressive silence. Ghost sat in her cockpit for 30 seconds, listening to the mountain's breath, before popping the canopy and stepping down onto Afghan soil. The air was thin at this altitude, sharp with the bite of snow that never fully melted even in summer. She'd been on the ground for less than a minute when a voice spoke from the rocks above her. "Hello, Ghost. It's been a long time." The man who emerged from concealment wore the same desert camouflage she'd spotted from the air, but now she could see his face clearly. Staff Sergeant Eric Phantom Volkov, her former teammate from the Nightshade program, officially killed in action during a training exercise in Nevada 6 years ago, unofficially standing before her with the kind of hard-earned scars that came from surviving things that officially never happened. "You're supposed to be dead, Eric," Ghost said, her hand instinctively checking the position of her sidearm. "Death is a flexible concept in our line of work," Phantom replied, his Russian accent still faintly audible despite years of American military service. "Besides, I could say the same about you. Last I heard, Captain Razvan had requested transfer to conventional units and disappeared into the regular Air Force." Ghost studied his face, looking for tells that might indicate deception or coercion. Phantom had been the team's intelligence specialist, the man who could extract information from sources that others couldn't even find. But he'd also been the one who'd questioned orders, who'd pushed back against missions that crossed lines they weren't supposed to see. The SEALs, Eric, where are they? Phantom's expression darkened. Safe for now, but that's going to change very quickly if we don't move. The people who took them aren't interested in prisoner exchanges or negotiations. They want something specific, and they think those 8 men can provide it. What kind of something? The kind that explains why Nightshade was really terminated. The kind that certain people in Washington would kill to keep buried. Phantom gestured toward a narrow trail that led deeper into the mountain complex. The SEALs stumbled across something they weren't supposed to find. Now their leverage in a game that started long before they were born. Ghost followed him up the trail, her flight suit inadequate protection against the mountain cold. I need details, Eric, real ones, because right now I'm operating on faith and caffeine and both are running low. Remember Operation Lazarus, the mission that supposedly never happened. Phantom stopped at a natural observation point that offered views of 3 different valleys. It happened, Ghost, all of it. And the reason we were ordered to never speak of it wasn't operational security. It was to protect people whose names you'd recognize from congressional hearings. The memories came flooding back like a dam breaking. Lazarus had been their final mission as a Nightshade team, a black operation in Syria that had officially been scrubbed before execution. But Ghost remembered the briefing, remembered the target, remembered the way Harrison's hands had shaken when he delivered their final orders. The weapons cache, she said quietly. Not weapons, documents, financial records, communications that proved certain American officials had been selling intelligence to hostile nations for years. Phantom's voice carried the bitter weight of betrayal. We weren't sent to destroy a terrorist cell. We were sent to eliminate evidence that could have brought down half the Senate. Ghost felt the world shift beneath her feet. The mission that had convinced her to leave Nightshade, the operation that had made her question everything she believed about serving her country, suddenly made terrible sense. They hadn't been soldiers that night in Syria. They'd been janitors, cleaning up messes made by people who'd sworn the same oath they had. And now someone's trying to finish what we started. The documents we thought were destroyed, they weren't. Someone hid copies, insurance policies against the people who'd been willing to sacrifice an entire special operations team to protect their secrets. Phantom pointed toward the eastern valley, where morning light was beginning to penetrate the deepest shadows. The SEALs found the cache, Ghost, all of it. Names, dates, bank accounts, communication intercepts, everything. The implications hit her like shrapnel from an exploding shell. If evidence of systematic treason at the highest levels of government had been discovered, the people responsible wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. 8 Navy SEALs weren't just missing, they were marked for death by their own countrymen. How long do we have? Ghost asked. Maybe 6 hours before a terrorist attack eliminates all evidence of their discovery. The cover story's already being written. Phantom's expression hardened. Unless we move right now, those 8 men become martyrs in someone else's war. Ghost looked back toward her aircraft, then up at the mountains that surrounded them like the walls of an ancient fortress. Everything she'd believed about duty, honor, and country was being tested by a revelation that made her stomach turn. But the choice itself was simple. 8 good men needed salvation, and she was the only one positioned to provide it. Show me where they are, she said. The trail Phantom led her along seemed to have been carved by centuries of wind and water, but Ghost noticed deliberate modifications. Handholds cut into rock faces, strategic placement of loose stones to camouflage the path from aerial observation. Someone had spent considerable time and effort making this route accessible while keeping it invisible. They climbed in silence for 20 minutes before reaching a plateau that offered commanding views of the surrounding terrain. Phantom stopped at what appeared to be another random rock formation, but when he pressed against a specific stone, an entire section of the cliff face swung inward on hidden hinges. "Welcome to the archive," he said, gesturing for Ghost to enter first. The chamber beyond was larger than her aircraft hangar, carved from living rock and illuminated by battery-powered LED strips. Along the walls, filing cabinets and computer servers hummed quietly, protected from the elements by sophisticated climate control systems that must have cost millions to install in such a remote location. "Jesus Christ," Ghost whispered. "He's got nothing to do with this place," Phantom replied. "This is where we stored everything we collected over 7 years of operations that officially never happened. Financial records, communication intercepts, video evidence, testimony from assets who thought they were working for their own governments. Everything." Ghost moved deeper into the chamber, her eyes adjusting to the artificial lighting. The scale of the operation became clear as she passed workstations equipped with state-of-the-art computers and satellite communication equipment. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a command center. "Who else knows about this?" "3 people including us. The third is dead, killed in a car accident in Virginia last month that wasn't an accident." Phantom's voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned to recognize assassination disguised as misfortune. "Which means we're the only ones left who can prove what really happened." "And the SEALs?" "They're being held in a facility about 3 clicks north of here. Former Soviet installation that was supposed to have been destroyed in 1989. It's where people take prisoners who need to disappear permanently." Phantom activated a wall-mounted display that showed satellite imagery of a complex built into a mountainside. 17 hostiles, all former special operations from various countries. They're professionals, Ghost, and they know we're coming. Ghost studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating approach routes, defensive positions, and extraction possibilities. The facility was built like a fortress, with multiple layers of security and fields of fire that would make any direct assault suicidal. "You want me to call in an airstrike," she said. "I want you to help me get those men out alive. Because once they're dead, everyone involved in this will walk away clean. The evidence disappears, the documents get classified beyond recognition, and 8 heroes get buried with lies about how they died." Ghost understood the choice she was being offered. She could return to her aircraft, report negative contact, and let events unfold according to someone else's plan. Or she could commit to a course of action that would either save 8 lives or add her name to the casualty list. She looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the vast archive of evidence that powerful people had killed to suppress. Then she met Phantom's eyes and made the decision that would define the rest of her life, however long that might be. "Tell me about their defenses." The briefing took 40 minutes, during which Ghost learned more about the intersection of politics and warfare than her entire military education had prepared her for. Phantom laid out the details with the precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for years, showing her blueprints of the facility, personnel files of the hostiles, and tactical assessments that revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities. The good news is that they're expecting a large-scale rescue operation. Helicopters, ground teams, the full special operations response, Phantom explained, pointing to defensive positions marked on the facility diagram. They're not prepared for 2 people with intimate knowledge of their capabilities. The bad news. The bad news is that even if we succeed, we'll be fugitives for the rest of our lives. The people behind this have resources we can't imagine and patience we can't outlast. Saving those SEALs means destroying any chance we have of returning to normal lives. Ghost considered this, weighing the cost of action against the price of inaction. She'd spent years trying to build a conventional military career, to prove that she could be valued for her skills rather than feared for her past. But the mountains had a way of stripping away pretense, of revealing what truly mattered when everything else fell away. "How do we get in?" Phantom smiled for the first time since her arrival, and Ghost recognized the expression from their old partnership. It was the look of a man who'd found someone willing to walk into hell beside him. The same way we always did. We improvise, we adapt, and we trust each other to bring everyone home. He moved to a weapons locker that contained equipment she hadn't seen since her Nightshade days. But first, you need to understand exactly what those SEALs discovered, because it's going to determine how we handle what comes next. Phantom activated a computer terminal and pulled up files that made Ghost's heart race. Bank records showing payments to American officials from foreign intelligence services. Communication, logs proving that mission plans had been shared with enemy forces before operations began. Video evidence of meetings that should never have taken place between people who should never have been in the same room. This is what they found, Ghost. Proof that some of our own people have been trading American lives for money. The SEALs weren't just on a routine patrol. They were investigating reports of unusual activity in this area. They found more than anyone expected. Ghost studied the documents, her anger building with each page. The men she'd served with, the operations she'd supported, the sacrifices she'd made, all of it had been undermined by people who'd sold their honor for profit. No wonder they want them dead, she said quietly. Dead and discredited. The official story will be that they went rogue, that they were selling secrets themselves. By the time the dust settles, their families will be too ashamed to ask questions, and anyone who might have supported them will distance themselves as quickly as possible. Ghost closed the files and turned toward the weapons locker. Inside, she found equipment she'd hoped never to use again, custom modifications to standard military hardware, communication devices that operated on frequencies most people didn't know existed, and weapons designed for situations where standard rules of engagement didn't apply. When do we move? Now, Phantom replied, checking his watch. The execution order goes active at 1400 hours. After that, everyone in that facility becomes a liability that needs to be eliminated. Ghost strapped on body armor that felt both familiar and foreign, like putting on the skin of someone she used to be. The weight of the equipment brought back muscle memories from missions that existed only in classified files, operations where success was measured not by territory taken or enemies killed, but by secrets protected and problems solved. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Phantom handed her a communication device that looked like a standard military radio but felt heavier than it should. Direct line to Harrison. Once we activate this, there's no going back. We'll be operating outside all normal chains of command. Ghost clipped the device to her gear and checked her weapon one final time. Outside, her A-10 waited on the improvised landing strip, ready to provide close air support if the situation demanded it. But she understood that this mission would likely be won or lost on the ground, in the dark spaces where air power couldn't reach. 8 men, she said, more to herself than to Phantom. 8 men, he agreed, and the truth they died trying to protect. They left the chamber through a different entrance, one that led directly into the mountain passages that would take them to the enemy facility. As they moved through darkness illuminated only by red-filtered flashlights, Ghost felt the weight of years falling away. She was no longer Captain Razvan, the competent but conventional pilot who'd built a respectable career in the regular Air Force. She was Ghost, the woman who specialized in impossible missions and unacceptable losses. The transformation was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant abandoning the safe life she'd constructed for herself. Liberating because it meant she could finally use all of her skills to save lives that mattered. The tunnel system led them through the heart of the mountain, past chambers filled with equipment from multiple eras of warfare. Ghost recognized Soviet-era communications, gear alongside modern American surveillance equipment, Chinese weapons next to Israeli electronics. This place had been a crossroads for clandestine operations for decades. How long has this been operational? She asked. Since the 1980s in various forms, the Soviets built the initial facility during their occupation. After they withdrew, it was taken over by the Mujahideen, then the Taliban, then us, then various contractors working for people who prefer to remain unnamed. Phantom's voice echoed strangely in the narrow passage. It's been a center for operations that governments need to disavow ever since. They reached a junction where the tunnel split into three directions. Phantom consulted a hand-drawn map before selecting the middle passage. The facility is another kilometer through this route. We'll come up underneath their main compound. As they continued deeper into the mountain, Ghost began to hear sounds that confirmed they were approaching their destination. Generator hum, ventilation system noise, and the occasional voice speaking in languages she couldn't identify. The enemy facility was directly above them. Phantom stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, but when he manipulated a hidden mechanism, a section of the ceiling slid aside to reveal a narrow shaft leading upward. This opens into their storage area. From there, we can access the detention cells where they're holding our people. Ghost looked up the shaft, calculating distances and angles. Security cameras. Disabled 20 minutes ago. I've been preparing for this moment longer than you might think. Phantom handed her a tablet that displayed real-time feeds from cameras throughout the facility. We have eyes on everything, but only for the next hour before they notice the system intrusion. Ghost studied the feeds, memorizing guard positions and patrol patterns. The 8 SEALs were being held in individual cells on the facility's lower level, separated to prevent communication and coordination. Professional procedure for valuable prisoners. Rules of engagement, she asked. Anyone between us and our people is a hostile. Anyone who tries to prevent extraction is a target. Anyone who might have information about who's running this operation. Phantom paused, meeting her eyes. Use your judgment. Ghost nodded, understanding the subtext. Some questions were more important than enemy lives, and some answers were worth the moral cost of obtaining them. It was the kind of calculation she'd hoped never to make again. They climbed the shaft in silence, each movement deliberate and controlled. At the top, Phantom performed a careful reconnaissance before signaling for Ghost to join him. They emerged into a storage room filled with crates bearing markings from multiple countries and time periods. Whatever was happening in this facility had been going on for much longer than the current crisis. The detention area lay beyond 2 security doors and a hallway monitored by cameras they'd hopefully neutralized. Ghost checked her watch. They had perhaps 40 minutes before the execution order became active, before their window of opportunity closed forever. Ready, Phantom whispered. Ghost thought about the 8 men waiting in cells below, about the secrets that had gotten them captured, about the lies that would bury them if she failed. She thought about her oath as an officer, her duty as an American, and her promise to bring everyone home. Let's go get our boys. The first security door yielded to Phantom's electronic skills with embarrassing ease, suggesting that whoever ran this facility was more concerned with keeping people in than keeping intruders out. Ghost moved through the opening with her weapon ready, sweeping corners and checking sight lines, with the automatic precision of someone trained to survive in hostile territory. The hallway beyond was illuminated by fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows and created dead zones where threats could hide. Ghost counted doorways, noting which ones showed signs of recent use and which appeared to be purely decorative. The facility was larger than the satellite imagery had suggested, with multiple levels connected by stairwells that weren't visible from above. They reached the detention level without encountering resistance, which made Ghost increasingly nervous. Professional captors didn't leave their prisoners unguarded unless they were supremely confident in their security measures or had already decided that the prisoners were expendable. 8 cells, Phantom whispered, consulting his tablet, distributed across 2 corridors. They're keeping our people separated but alive. For now, Ghost replied grimly. The first prisoner they found was Petty Officer Marcus Chen, a combat medic whose face showed the kind of controlled pain that comes from interrogation techniques designed to extract information without leaving permanent marks. He looked up as Ghost entered his cell, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes. "Captain," Chen's voice was hoarse but steady, "are we getting out of here?" "That's the plan, Petty Officer. Can you walk?" "Yes, ma'am. They've been asking questions about our mission parameters, what we found in the valley. I haven't told them anything useful." Chen stood with the careful movements of someone working through injuries. "But they're getting impatient." Ghost helped him from the cell while Phantom moved to secure the next prisoner. The pattern repeated itself across 7 more cells, professional soldiers who'd been captured, interrogated, but not broken. Whatever the SEALs had discovered was still secret, still protected by the kind of discipline that turned ordinary men into elite warriors. The 8th cell contained Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the team leader whose tactical decisions had probably kept all of them alive through the initial capture. He was in worse condition than the others, having apparently been the primary focus of their captor's attention. "Sir, we're here to extract your team," Ghost said as she cut his restraints. Morrison studied her face with the careful attention of someone trained to identify threats and allies in equal measure. "Captain Razvan, I know that name. You're the pilot who—" "Right now I'm the pilot who's getting you out of here," Ghost interrupted. "We need to move. How's your mobility?" "I can keep up," Morrison replied, though his movements suggested otherwise. "But Captain, you need to know what we found out there. This isn't just about us anymore." Ghost helped him stand while keeping one eye on the corridor outside. "I know about the documents, Commander. We'll discuss intelligence once we're clear of this facility." "No, ma'am. Not documents. Personnel." Morrison's voice carried an urgency that made Ghost pause. "We found American advisors working with known terrorist cells. Active-duty personnel assigned to units that officially don't exist, training foreign fighters to use our own tactics against us." The revelation hit Ghost like a physical blow. Bad enough that American officials might be selling intelligence, but the possibility that American soldiers were actively training enemies suggested a level of betrayal that transcended simple corruption. It implied a systematic effort to prolong conflicts for profit, to ensure that wars continued generating revenue for the right people. "How many?" she asked. "At least a dozen that we could identify. All special operations, all assigned to classified programs that give them latitude to operate without oversight." Morrison straightened with,